Good evening, everybody. Before we start today's podcast, Cross Continent Chats would like to acknowledge that this podcast is being performed at the Toronto traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississauga of the Credit, in addition to the Miami traditional lands of the Miccosukee and the Tequesta. If you guys do not know any of these names and have never heard them before, look them up. They all have an amazing story. And with that, enjoy the podcast. Okay, so let's get started tonight. Episode 7 of Cross Continents Chats. My name is Charlie. I am from Miami, Florida. I will be hosting tonight's podcast with my friend and colleague, Rachael Bishop from Toronto, Ontario. All right, so we're going to start with question number 1, something that we've been talking about pretty heavily in the last few podcasts, and that is the sport of hockey. So the NHL has come out with their training camp date. That date is to start July 10th. And the thought is to still start in mid-August, but there still isn't a confirmed date, even though the NBA has already decided that their return to play will be July 31st. So, even though they said sometime mid-August, I'm honestly not sure. So, Rachel, when do you think this thing will actually start, if it even will start in September?
Honestly, dealing with the NHL, who knows? Really, who knows at this point?
Yeah.
Like coronavirus, nobody knows what's going to happen from day to day. I kind of feel like that way with the NHL. But the NHL has said July 10th, this is our date for training camp. But the NBA has actually put out a full timeline and schedule of when players can arrive, when families can arrive, and when they expect to end. They have a much more concrete plan. The NHL doesn't have any plans like that. They've just said July 10th, we're hoping to have training camp for 3 weeks, and then we're hoping to go into our play-in round by mid-August. Again, no concrete date. So, yeah, again, it doesn't sound like the NHL is very well organized, which they're probably not. So, who really knows? I'm going to say mid-August just because I want to give the NHL the benefit of the doubt, but they also have to work in the fact that the NBA has to deal with this too. But I have to work in the fact that contracts expire July 1st, which is Canada Day. And so far, they haven't come to any decision on how they're going to extend these contracts, which they're obviously going to have to do because you have massive names coming up in free agency. So you can't go to your play-in series with players who aren't on contracts. So they're going to have to figure that out before they can even return to play after that. So that's an issue that they haven't even discussed yet. So that's something else they have to work out before they can even think about going back to play and actually having their playing around. Another factor could be also the reason why we're hearing a delay is because there's still some Canadian teams in the mix for the hub cities, namely Toronto. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, is still saying that if you want to enter the Canadian border, you have to have a 14-day quarantine. That's obviously not going to work for NHL teams. They can't have a 14-day quarantine and then expect to play if it's one of the hub cities. So if that continues, they're only going to have games in the U.S. But the problem is that my understanding is that the NHL is planning on having training camp in each team's respective city, unlike the NBA, which is planning on having training camp at Disney World. So let's say the NHL has training camp, like the Leafs have training camp in Toronto. Some players are not in Toronto right now, but half the team's not in Toronto. They'll have to get to Toronto 2 weeks early and have a 14-day quarantine and then go to training camp and then just leave again to go to the U.S., it seems a bit silly to me. So they're going to have to work that out as well with Justin Trudeau. I think that's another factor. So, yeah, there's really a lot in play right now. It also depends on what the health professionals say. Also, Toronto's a hotspot for COVID, so it depends on what Toronto says. So, yeah, really, who knows? But I'm hoping by mid-August, but you never know.
Okay, cool. Good answer. It's totally understandable to think about it on a national level in terms of since Trudeau wants to have a 2-week quarantine, which is just not feasible for NHL teams. I can understand how that you have to play catch up with that because rules change all the time for this thing. But what I just don't understand is, so other than all of this, and I know many podcasts ago, we talked about the racism issue and Akeem Aliu and everything in the NHL. My question is, what the heck have the NHL been doing this entire coronavirus? Because you only come up with a training camp date, which is not great, and it's hoping, the key word hoping, to come back mid-April. Like, that's like the least concrete answer you can get. And I just wanna know what did they do? They didn't do anything. They haven't even addressed the racism issue very much on how they're going to fix it or change it. And then on top of it all, they can't even figure out how to play yet. And it's like, why don't you just call up Adam Silver and be like, yo, what did you do? I want to know what's going on. How do you do this? Because Adam Silver's a newer commissioner than Gary Bettman, but he's got this figured out.
I really don't know what the NHL is doing. That's a great question. If I knew the answer of what the NHL is doing all the time, I would have all of Let's answers, because that is $1 million question right there. What are they doing a lot of the time? No one knows.
Yeah.
I think too the biggest differences between the NHL and the NBA is that the NBA is much more of a player-friendly league. It's much more of, from my understanding, is listening to what the players want, whereas the NHL is more, it's all about owners and it's all about revenue and hockey-related revenue, that little chestnut we hear about every CBA. Whereas because they're always the fourth league in the U.S., the fourth most popular league out of the major leagues, so most of the money is coming from gates and stuff, and not from television deals. So it's all about the owners, and the more money they bring in, into the gates, the more money the owners get. So hockey's always been more about hockey-related revenue and that kind of thing, and so it's much more owner-friendly. Whereas I feel like the NBA is more of a player-friendly league, so that could also be another reason why they seem to know what's going on, is because they actually have the players' input. Whereas the NHL is just basically Gary Bettman and his band of merry men, his favorite owners like Jeremy Jacobs, for example, who kind of run things, right? So,
AKA the old boys club.
Exactly. Jeremy Jacobs, for our viewers, if they don't know, is the owner of the Boston.
Oh, okay. You and I didn't know that.
Okay.
I'm with you, viewers. I'm with you. Let's move into the next question. It is also NHL, and I think for the first time in like this entire podcast series that we've been doing, I'm actually not making an NHL question that absolutely tears the NHL apart. Sweet. So what we're doing is I want to look at a couple of playoff series that are play-in series. Sorry, play-in series. And we're going to look at the West this time. And a matchup that on paper looks like a really interesting matchup to me is the Calgary Flames and the Winnipeg Jets. So I think it's going to be interesting because Winnipeg's a great team. They have great goaltending. Calgary Flames have an amazing offense. They have a solid defense, and their goaltending is, well, interesting. So, in my opinion, in your opinion, Rachel, who do you think will take that series, and in how many games, and so on?
It's a very interesting question because it's not something I'd honestly thought about until today. But so doing a little bit of research, definitely going into the season, I would not have guessed Winnipeg to do as well as they're doing, because they just got decimated on defense, and their defense is still very much a question mark. Josh Morrissey's missed a lot of time. He should be back healthy, but losing Dustin Bufflin was a big blow. I also forgot they lost Tobias Enstrom a couple of years ago, which was another big blow to them. Tyler Myers left, or I think he left. He may be still there. Jacob Trouba left, which was a big blow for them as well. Jacob Trouba, of course, went to the Rangers, and he was a key defenseman for them. Whether or not you think his contract is too much with the Rangers is neither here nor there, but he was one of their best defensemen. So basically, their team is Josh Morrissey right now on defense. So their defense is questionable. But the reason why they're even in this position, and they probably wouldn't have been in playoffs if not for the play-in. They might have been, but the reason why they're even in this position is because of Potter Hellebuck, who, outside of Tuukka Rask, looking at stats in terms of purely save percentage, outside of Tuukka Rask, he's been the best starting goalie this season with .922 save percentage in 57 games played. So he's played by far the most games out of any starting goalie in the NHL. Tuukka Rask has only played 41, and he's got a .924 save percentage. So he's been amazing when he's played way fewer games. He's on a better team. So, and interestingly enough, the the Jets actually have scored 16 more goals than Calgary. I think a large part of that is because Connor Hellebuyck has been a brick wall, and he's definitely a Vezina Trophy favorite for sure. Looking on purely on paper, Calgary definitely has a better decor. You have Mark Giordano, you have TJ Brody, you have you have Michael Stone, who's not bad as a depth defenseman, and then you have some other guys in there.
Noah Hannafin,
thank you. So I knew I was forgetting someone. So the decor is definitely stronger than Winnipeg, but Winnipeg's offense, I think, is where it's at. Like, their depth on forward is very strong. But obviously, in terms of puck possession, their Corsi numbers, neither team is very good at Corsi, but Winnipeg has, I think, the 6th worst in the NHL in terms of puck possession. Sorry, Fenwick's. That's all shot attempts toward the other team minus block shots. The puck possession's not very good. They don't have very good defense. That makes sense. Calgary is better. They're 17th, so they're around the middle of the pack a little bit. And then, neither team is very good in special teams. So both teams have about a 20% power play and 80% penalty kill. So their special teams aren't very good. Now that Calgary is a pretty decent puck possession team, Winnipeg's a bad puck possession team. Yet Winnipeg has scored more goals, large in part because Mark Scheifele has had a ridiculously high shooting percentage at 20%, which is, of course, not going to last, or 15%. And then you have, conversely, Connor Hellebuyck, who's stopping pucks left, right, and center. So I haven't looked into this, but I'm assuming their PDO, which basically just means luck. It's shooting percentage plus save percentage. Their PDO would be very high. So Calgary is definitely more in the middle. But that being said, even though I think probably Calgary does have a better team overall, despite the fact that I liked Winnipeg's forwards better, I do think, and especially, fans won't come into a factor, but I do think that I will take Winnipeg in this play-in series just because of their goaltending. And they say that the goalie is the most important position on the team, especially in playoffs. And I'm just not confident with Calgary's duo of Cam Talbot's been pretty good this year with a 919 save percentage, but I'm just not confident with Big Save Dave, they call him, Dave Reddick, as their other goalie. And Cam Talbot, he's not been as consistent as Connor Hellebuyck. Now, Winnipeg's, obviously, their luck could turn around and should go down, but that's more of a long-term thing. In a short-term 5-game play-in, I definitely could see them winning. I think it'll be very interesting, but I think Winnipeg, when you have someone like Blake Wheeler, I think he's definitely a player to watch because he's a really good player performer and a really good player. Mark Scheifele, I think they're definitely players to watch. And then, of course, you have Connor Hellebuyck. You can win a playoff series just based on a goalie. And we saw that happen with the 2017 Pittsburgh Penguins when they won the Stanley Cup because the goalie stood on their head. So my pick would definitely be Winnipeg for that series, even though I think probably Calgary is the better team on paper. As we know, championships are not won on paper. But that would be my final.
So, how many games?
What is it? It's a 5-game play-in series.
Yeah.
We could play in just to get to the first round of the playoffs, technically. So Calgary loses a series, I have a chance of NHL lottery, which is good for them. So how many games? I don't know. Let's say 3 games to 2.
Okay.
I think it'll be close. I definitely think it'll be a close play-in series, as they call it. But I think just because of the Connor Hellebuyck factor, and because Winnipeg seems to have, other than Mark Giordano, Winnipeg seems to have some players on their team who are kind of more experienced in the playoffs. Paul Maurice is also a preseason playoff coach.
I believe Mark Giordano's for the Flames, not for the Jets.
Other than Mark, I meant to say, sorry. What I meant to say was they have more playoff experience than Calgary, other than Mark Giordano on Calgary. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting because Johnny Gaudreau and Sean Monahan have had good playoff experience as well. Those are definitely There are definitely 2 leaders on that team, and it would be great to see Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, and Matthew Tkachuk, who's one of my favorite players in the NHL, because he has a lot of personality. I'll put it that way, personality.
He's very dirty, if you guys don't know.
He's not that bad. He's not as bad as his dad. His dad is worse.
He's dirty.
His dad is worse. His dad was worse.
Yeah, but he's still a dirty player.
He's not that bad.
He's not.
There's dirtier players in the NHL than Matthew Tkachuk.
Okay, but do you want to stoop to Brad Marchand level? Like, come on.
No, but there's still other dirty players. Patrick Hornqvist is a dirty player.
Patrick Hornqvist is not a dirty player.
Yes, he is. He is such a grinder and a goon, and he messes with people.
He's not dirty.
Yes, he doesn't get caught. He is such a goon.
He's not dirty at all.
Yes, he is. He's a completely dirty player.
Matthew Tkachuk is dirty. Patrick Hornqvist is not dirty. He's
no. Patrick Hornqvist just doesn't get caught, but he does a lot of stupid things.
Not dirty.
He does, man. Yes, he is. Anyway, I think Sean Monahan, Johnny Gaudreau, Matthew Tkachuk versus Mark Scheifele. Underwhelming, but I hope he does better. Patrick Laine and Blake Wheeler. That's going to be a very interesting matchup, and that's one that I'm definitely going to tune into.
Don't forget about Kyle Connor, who's leading the team in points.
And Kyle Connor. So for our next question, we're kind of going to go into the NFL. NFL players, particularly the cornerback for the San Francisco 49ers, Richard Sherman, who is not a stranger to being vocal. He's called out NFL owners for keeping quiet. The one in particular that he's called out is none other than Jerry Jones of the Dallas Cowboys. Yep, how about them Cowboys? So with that, with all of these protests that are going on, these owners are being silent. Jerry Jones is being silent, especially when the NFL is a league that is 75% black. So, why do you think that Jerry Jones is being silent?
That's a great question. So, former Cowboys player Des Bryant has actually come out in support of Jerry Jones and has said that he doesn't think he's racist, but he thinks that maybe he's so business oriented. He learned a lot about business from him. He thinks he and his son, who is the CEO, Stephen Jones, who's the CEO of the team, he thinks that they're so business oriented, and that's why they haven't said anything, not because they're racist or anything, but because they just focus on the team and the team being a business, and have not said anything, and they were not in the video that the Cowboys released, 2-minute video about racism. They were not in it. He thinks it's because they're so focused on being a business-like team, and they don't really speak their mind. But then Yahoo Sports was saying how he's always very vocal. He's one of the most vocal owners in the league. So the fact that he hasn't said anything about this issue does reflect badly on him, because why isn't he saying anything now? And I definitely think that's a good point, because I'm sure he's not racist. The majority of people aren't. But the fact that he hasn't said anything, it's leaving that question open for people to say, is he racist or is he not? And not to mention that, he's a white owner in a league that's predominantly black. 75% of players in the NFL are black.
Indeed.
So that's obviously a very big issue for NFL players. And if I'm not mistaken, the Cowboys were one of the teams who came out in 2017 when a year after Colin Kaepernick started the anthem protest, Jerry Jones said, our players will stand for the anthem or else there will be consequences. So knowing that we know that he said that, and knowing that, he's definitely one of the more Republican owners in the league. He did donate $1 million to Donald Trump's inauguration campaign in 2016, along with the owner of the New England Patriots, Robert Kraft. He's probably just not saying anything, probably because he doesn't himself believe in the kneeling, but he also doesn't, obviously he's not a racist, but he himself doesn't believe in the kneeling, and he probably doesn't want to say anything because he's afraid of it being taken out of context. But at the same time, him not saying anything probably does look badly on him, because it leaves it up to interpretation. So he's kind of in a lose-lose situation, really. That's what I would say. But I did read something interesting that came out today. It was a New York Times opinion piece written by Maureen Dowd, and it was Greg Popovich. So Greg Popovich is a legendary coach of the San Antonio Spurs in the NBA. He's also white, but the NBA is also predominantly black, but it's way more progressive league. And Greg Popovich was saying he thought Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft were hypocritical because they donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration campaign, and the New England Patriots have, and now Robert Kraft particularly has donated money to black organizations, and Donald Trump, has his history with, he's been allegedly to be seen as racist and whatnot. So it's just interesting that Greg Popovich came out and said that. obviously Jerry Jones hasn't donated any money to any black campaigns as far as I know. But I guess it's just the fact that he's letting all these players on the Cowboys speak out and whatnot. He just thought it was hypocritical. So obviously he's not a fan.
I'm totally not surprised that Des Bryant supports Jerry Jones, because for the folks who don't know NFL, if you can think of one of the biggest player divas in NFL history, it is Des Bryant. Des Bryant, while he was an incredibly talented receiver on the field, his off-field antics and the fact that Jerry Jones essentially let him do whatever he wanted, which led him to become a cancer in the locker room and eventually just make him essentially useless for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not surprised that he's backing him up. Jerry Jones let Des Bryant do whatever he wanted, and Des Bryant, even to this day, hasn't played. He only wanted to play for the Cowboys. He went to another team. He hasn't even showed up. He hasn't even performed because Des Bryant is a huge diva. So I kind of find it interesting that he's backing him up, but it makes complete sense in my mind why Des Bryant would be backing up Jerry Jones. In my honest opinion, I think Jerry Jones should say something, even if it's just two sentences about showing solidarity or putting up a picture of a fist or hashtag Black Lives Matter or something. I think he should just say something. It doesn't have to be an entire heartfelt paragraph monologue. It doesn't have to be that. But I think he has to say something. He's an owner of the Dallas Cowboys, which is one of the biggest franchises in the world, in the United States of America, and in the National Football League. I think he should just say something. That's my opinion. Moving on, I'm glad you mentioned Greg Popovich, because we're gonna go into the NBA. And the Olympics and what would happen with that. So the Olympics, as we know, have been delayed due to the coronavirus, and it's set for June 2021. Since the new NBA season is going to start on December 1st, of course, again because of COVID-19, the NBA players would not be able to go to the some NBA players representing their countries would not be able to go to the qualifying rounds due to NBA season commitments. Because by that point, it'll be late in the season / postseason. So I wanted to ask you, Rachel, with that thing in mind, and this is something that was mentioned by legendary player and legendary coach Steve Kerr, who is currently the head coach of the Golden State Warriors. Well, what do you do? How would you solve this issue? Because it is important in the NBA, it's really important to also represent your country, because the NBA is a very international league with players from all over the place. A lot of players from Africa, a lot of players from Europe. Of course, the majority of the players being from the United States. Of course, there's also Canadian players, like Andrew Wiggins as an example.
Second largest continent of players is from Canada after the US.
There you go. So with that, how would you solve this issue?
That's a great question. So Steve Kerr is slated to be one of the assistants under Greg Popovich's staff next year. And there's a lot of NBA coaches who are going to be involved. So there's a Raptors assistant who's supposed to coach Spain. There's someone who's supposed to coach Nigeria, and Brett Brown of the Philadelphia 76ers is supposed to coach Australia. And of course, Nick Nurse is supposed to be the coach of Team Canada. So it affects a lot of coaches as well as players. So one thing that NBA.com actually suggested was that the NBA could go back to its old schedule, its old, more condensed schedule for a year. So they could go away from its player-friendly schedule. So right now they're on a schedule where back-to-backs are largely eliminated, since a lot of players don't play on them anyways, and they don't have 4 games in 5 nights. So the NBA could go back to that old schedule with 4 games in 5 nights, also have more back-to-backs, but then you're also having Olympics on top of that. Players can be more tired. But that could be one way around them still making it time for qualifying, because if the NBA were to start next year when it's planning to start on December 1st, and that means that the season would finish in May and playoffs would be happening basically right in June, which is when qualifying is supposed to happen, which is only 19 days before the Olympics are slated to start. And so the US has already qualified, so is Australia. But Canada, Lithuania, Croatia, and Serbia all have to qualify, and they are all countries with a sizable NBA presence, right? And we already saw with Canada last year when they had the initial qualifying with FIBA in the World Championship, a lot of NBA players did not participate. So if we already have that conflict and it's playoffs versus Olympic qualifying, obviously the players who are in the playoffs, they're going to be performing in the playoffs. So that's once again going to diminish your chances of qualifying for the Olympics. So one way to do that is, as I said, to have the condensed schedule. Another way that you could do this is you could just have a shortened schedule and just have fewer games and just for 1 year and have the season finish early. That way players can do both, provided that they have obviously agreed on this with the players. That could be another issue because it seems as though the NBA is way more Olympic friendly than the NHL. Because as we know, the NHL didn't go to Pyeongchang the last Winter Olympics, but the NBA always wants to see to go to the Olympics, especially the Americans. So that could be another thing that the NBA could do would be to shorten the season and just have fewer games. And I know Adam Silver has been actually thinking about doing that anyways. He's always talking about reforming and stuff. So that could be something that we can even look at. Who knows if the Olympics will even happen? So I feel like this is an issue that we really can't talk about right now until we even know if the Olympics will happen in 2021. But I think condensing the schedule or shortening the season would be two good options to have players who still to allow players who still need to qualify the chance to qualify, and then those who are Americans and Australians who've already qualified, they could just get a longer break because the Olympics are already a grind in itself, right? So they could just get a longer break to prepare for the Olympics.
Cool. Yeah, that's definitely interesting to see, and it's definitely early to tell. But I figured it'd be good to get some initial thoughts on like how that would even possibly work. All right, so now we're gonna go into a question that I really like that I think was very interesting. It took a lot of digging to find this one, but there have been talks in North America. This is about football or soccer. There have been talks about creating a North American Soccer Super League. So what I mean by that is that it would combine Liga MX, which is the Mexican Soccer League, Major League Soccer (MLS), and of course three Canadian teams in MLS as well. So Canada, Mexico, USA, one massive soccer league. Um, they already have been doing cups and tournaments between the teams. A lot of Mexican players are actually taking MLS as a next step. So that's something that's really cool. So for a country like Canada that's not a soccer nation, but they're getting into a soccer nation, you have, of course, the Canada women's soccer team, which is awesome. And, Christine Sinclair, stats wise, is definitely the best soccer player of all time, men and women, for international. Of course, you have Alphonso Davies, who's absolutely tearing it up in the Bundesliga right now at left back, funny enough, but a very active left back. So, if this were to happen, a 50-team Super League between Canada, the US, and Mexico, what would the benefits be to a country like Canada that is not traditionally a soccer country?
So just to clear that up, it would be 30 MLS teams and 20 Mexican teams. So right now there's only 8 teams in the league.
Yeah, a 50-team Super League.
You have to add 2 teams that would be promoted because they still have a promotion and relegation thing going on in Mexico.
It's a 50-team Super League. How would it benefit a country like Canada?
So I think that it would be good for a country like Canada because Mexico, in terms of the CONCACAF region, which is the North American region, Mexico is by far the strongest when it comes to soccer. Every time there's a CONCACAF Champions League, a Mexican team always wins. They always make the Olympics, and they usually do pretty well. Mexican has had a history of really good soccer players, and as you said, they have had a good history of doing well in MLS, right? And they always have tournaments, international tournaments, and they started to do kind of like their own version of the League Cup or their FA Cup with North America, and they have the Champions League for all of the CONCACAF region, etc. So I think it would give Canadian players a good chance to see some really good North American soccer, because the MLS is not the best league, but if they play against Mexican players in a country that's much more soccer crazy and soccer friendly, it would give them a chance to play against really good competition and hopefully improve them as well. And that would only make Canada stronger, because until Canada can compete with the likes of Mexico, they're not going to be a serious country on the world, serious world power when it comes to soccer. And we also know this is a partnership that could work because, of course, the 2026 World Cup is a joint bid in North America between Canada, United States, and Mexico. So we know that this bid could work. We know this joint partnership could work. Furthermore, it would be great for, once we get fans back in the seats. I actually didn't know this until today, but La Liga MX is by far the most popular soccer league in the U.S. It's got more fans in terms of viewership than MLS, more fans in terms of viewership
it does.
than European soccer, which makes a lot of sense because there's a sizable Mexican population in the United States, right? Especially in places that share a border. So I think it'd be great for Canada. I think it could also, they've had TFC, Toronto FC has had some CONCACAF final games against some teams in Mexico, so it could renew those rivalries. Not to mention Chivas USA used to be an MLS team, so that would be a good rivalry to get back in terms of MLS. And there's a lot of cities that share borders with Mexican teams, so that'd be really cool to see that rivalry, right? You could have some really good rivalries with the California teams and the Mexican teams, or with the Texas teams and the Mexican teams as well. So that doesn't really answer the Canada question, but I think it would help Canada as a whole because it would allow them to compete against the best players in this region, which once they've competed against the best players in this region, hopefully that will allow them to be able to compete against the best players in the world, which are in Europe for the most part.
Cool. Great answer. Something that I'd also like to touch upon is, of course, for years now, the MLS has been a destination for retiring soccer players from Europe to come play. So I think it'd be great if they had this Super League, if this actually happens, that you would see players like Cristiano Ronaldo and Luis Suarez and Lionel Messi playing on Mexican teams just to make it even more popular. Or Toronto FC signs Kevin De Bruyne. It could be something really cool to see that it's all under one league, and you're going to have former European superstars that just want to live out their golden years, so to speak. And then
it would also strengthen MLS as well. And as you said, more European players might want to come play if it's strengthening MLS.
Exactly. So I think you add that mix, you add also, more players playing with each other. Now that teams from the Mexican League are now going to play in MLS is really good. Particularly a star for the Mexico team, Rodolfo Pizarro, plays now for Inter Miami FC. He has scored the only goal the franchise has ever owned because, unfortunately, coronavirus happened, so they only played 2 games, and they didn't even play their home opener. So that sucks, and he's the guy who scored the only goal in the franchise's history in months.
And you have another Mexican legend, Chicharito, aka Javier Hernandez, who used to play over in Europe and is now playing in MLS as well, and he's Mexican.
Yeah, Chicharito. And no worries. Yeah, that would be that's awesome, and I think this would be definitely an interesting league and definitely something to look forward to possibly in the future. All right, so that kind of ends the question portion of it. And we're gonna go into our segment portion. I'd like to start with our weekly sports spectacles. So sports spectacles is essentially when I go out and I talk about the upcoming games in the week. And this week I am very, 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 very excited because this coming week is the debut of the English Premier League's return to play. So check out on Wednesday, 17th of June. You're going to have 2 fantastic matches that I have to talk about, both of them. First is the big one, Man City and Arsenal. So Arsenal's under new manager Mikel Arteta. That team was an absolute disaster going into this season. Arteta, with his no-nonsense, has absolutely turned that team around. They're playing way better. Mesut Ozil is actually being useful. They are using Aubameyang and Lacazette properly, and they looks like they're going to be starting a great rebuilding project. And then, of course, you're playing with the current, soon to not be Premier League champions, Manchester City. Fantastic team led by Pep Guardiola. It's going to be a great matchup. The other matchup is before Arsenal. Mikel Arteta, who was an Arsenal invincible, was an assistant manager under Pep Guardiola and Man City, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the season, he just split from Man City to take the Arsenal job. And this is the first time that they're meeting up as managers. So that's definitely going to be interesting.
I didn't know that. That's really funny.
The other matchup that's going to be happening is a relegation battle. You're going to have Aston Villa from Birmingham and Sheffield United. Sheffield United, no, is not in the relegation zone, but I like to mention them because they were in the championship last year, and they're actually vying for a Europa League spot in their first recent season of being promoted. And Aston Villa is fighting for a relegation spot. Both teams are fantastic. I absolutely love Aston Villa. The way they work, I love their style. Jack Grealish is a beauty, and I absolutely would hate for Villa to be relegated this year. So they're going to play hard. And against a team like Sheffield United, which doesn't have that much Premier League experience, Sheffield United, it's going to be a battle of the championship of last year. So it's going to be really cool to see. Sheffield United, even though they're new, they're playing super well. And if you look at that team, they're like the most English team ever with the most English manager ever. So it's like, it's really cool. And they're an exciting team to watch. They also have an awesome logo. Definitely check that out on Wednesday. It's going to be excellent. Another team that I want to touch upon is on Friday, the 19th of June. You're going to have Tottenham Hotspur and Manchester United. That one is going to be really good. It is going to see Jose Mourinho face off against Man United, the team that fired him after he lost 3-1 to Liverpool. Jose Mourinho has not done that well at Tottenham, in my honest opinion, even though he has essentially made Heung-min Son even better than he already was. That is going to be amazing, and he's going to face off against his new boss, his replacement boss, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, with a red hot at the time, Marcus Rashford. So Heung-min Son, Marcus Rashford, that's definitely going to be interesting, and because I'm super biased, I hope Man United loses that one. And those are my sports spectacles for the week.
Just for those if you don't know, Manchester United and Liverpool FC are arch rivals in English football, so that's why he hopes it.
Exactly. Thank you for clarifying that. So with that, those are some of the games to watch, but definitely check them all out because you never know. This is football. Anything can possibly happen. So our next segment is actually a new one, and it's called The Marketplace. And the reason why we call it The Marketplace is because Rachel is going to be talking about transfers and trades and contracts and all the stuff that you would find in a sports market. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Charlie. So yeah, I'm particularly excited about this new segment because I think it'll be quite interesting. So I have some soccer and some hockey talk for you for this marketplace. So as we know, as you may not know, the Canadian Hockey League, that's the major junior hockey league for Canada. It consists of the Ontario Hockey League, the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, and the Western Hockey League canceled its season and has named its awards. But they're still going on with their drafts, and the QMJHL has even said that October 1st is going to be its tentative start date. So it's pushed its season back a couple weeks. But the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League has had its American draft and its regular draft, and they still have to have their import draft by June 30th. I would like to talk about the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League draft, and particularly the Halifax Mooseheads, because that is my Quebec Major Junior Hockey League team. That is
as it is mine. Yeah, thank you, Dal, for that fantastic education.
We went to school in Halifax, and if you get the chance to go to a Mooseheads game, it's the biggest team in town because they don't have an NHL team or an AHL team. Check it out. The atmosphere is amazing. Tickets are very cheap, and it's right downtown. It's very easy to get to. It's a really great vibe, really fun, and it's near lots of, local restaurants and establishments after, so you're well situated. So
beers are like $5.
So anyways, and they have a lot of really great players that have come out of that organization. So Halifax Mooseheads had a lot of draft picks in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League draft. I think they ended up having 12. They did trade a couple of them, but they still had about 12 draft picks, which is what you want if you're trying to rebuild, which junior teams rebuild every 2 years. In particular, I'd like to talk about 2 of their draft picks. The first one is someone they took in the first round, 18th overall, forward, Jordan Dumais. He's pretty small. He's only 5'8", but that's pretty standard for the Mooseheads. They do like to have teams that are built on speed, smaller guys that are speedy, not physical. Timo Meier is kind of the only one that comes to mind recently who's been a physical beast, but also a really skilled player who's bigger. They do tend to draft smaller guys, so it's not out of the realm for them. He's only 5'8", but he's from Quebec, but he played in the U.S. last year in a U.S. Junior Hockey League. He's a forward, and he had 125 points in 52 games, which is absolutely disgusting. That's really gross. That is almost 2 points per game I think actually over 2 points per game. As a forward, obviously not playing in the world's greatest league, but he's still drafted first overall, playing against some good competition, and he just tore up the league like that. So I'd definitely watch out for him. And Halifax knows how to develop these small, speedy players, as I've said, so I think he can be a really good player for them. And then in the second round, just 4 picks later, at 22 overall, they picked a defenseman named Jake Furlong, and he's actually a local. He's from Nova Scotia. He's from Upper Tantallon, which is in the HRM, in the Halifax Region Municipality, near St. Margaret's Bay, if you're not familiar. They took him at 22nd overall. He was a highly touted draft pick in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League draft. He had 44 points in 56 games last year, playing for the league that he played in. I believe he also he played prep school in the U.S. as well, so I think he played at Connecticut. 44 points in 56 games, which is very good numbers. That's about 0.7 points per game, which is very good for a defenseman. And in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League video, he compares himself to none other than Christopher Letang of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Of course, also came out of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Chris Letang is a smooth skating, offensive-minded defenseman, but he's also great defensively as well. But definitely offense is his strong suit. And just from looking at small little highlight clips of Jake Furlong, I can definitely see the Chris Letang comparison. He's a very smooth skater. He can skate end-to-end. He's very fast, and he looks like he's very smart as well. So I'll definitely watch out for him. I think he can be a great player for the Mooseheads whenever he does make the team. So Jordan Dumais and Jake Furlong. And it's always great when the Mooseheads draft a Nova Scotia kid because they're playing at home, and that's awesome. They try to do that as well. So that's really great. They drafted another Nova Scotia kid, and they're great at developing players. And I'm really looking forward to seeing who they get in the import draft because they're great at finding Europeans and making them into NHL superstars. Some recent players that have come out of there that play in the NHL now. We already mentioned one, Timo Meier, Nikolai Ehlers. Then you also have Philip Zadina and Nico Hischier. So that's a pretty good. Those are all first-round picks now playing in the NHL that came out of the Moosehead system, and of course Jakub Voracek as well, who plays for the Flyers. So just now moving on to soccer.
I'm sorry to cut you off for a second, Rachel.
Yeah.
For the folks who don't know, you're thinking of a top player in the NHL that played for the Halifax Mooseheads, Nathan MacKinnon of the Colorado Avalanche. Yes, that guy, number 29, was a superstar for the Halifax Mooseheads. And Rachel and I, in our time there, did have the pleasure of seeing him play and absolutely be amazing, as he always is.
Yes, actually.
Just wanted to add that bit.
That's a good point they bring up. When I was visiting Halifax in grade 12, they were in the playoffs. That was the year they won the Memorial Cup, which is the Memorial Cup is the oldest hockey and trophy in junior hockey. It is a Stanley Cup of junior hockey. They had a top line of Nathan McKinnon, Jonathan Drouin, third overall pick, same year as Nathan McKinnon, also in the NHL, and Martin Furk, who hasn't carved out a huge career, but he's been a successful player in Detroit. That was their top line, McKinnon, Furk, and Drouin. Absolutely disgusting. I somehow managed to get tickets for a playoff game to see them when I was visiting. We had nosebleed seats, but it was awesome. They won that game in overtime. I think it was a second round matchup, and I believe it was Jonathan Drouin who scored the winning goal, assisted by McKinnon and Furk. So I did get to see them play in my time, and that was really cool.
And a super fun fact, but the hardest NHL shot in the world belongs to none other than Martin Furk. 109 miles an hour. The former hardest shot in the world, which I think, Rachel, please correct me because I'm probably going to get this wrong, 107.5 miles an hour was by Zdeno Chara of the Boston Bruins.
I think he was 108.8.
Oh, 108.8. See, I knew I would get it wrong.
Yes, Furk did break that record in the AHL, correct.
And so he has the hardest shot in the world, 109 miles an hour, which is ridiculous. Anyway, enough of me cutting in. Keep going.
Moosehead's a very good organization. Check them out if you get the chance. Go to Halifax. So moving on now from hockey to soccer. You mentioned Canada soccer. So we had some surprising news with Canada soccer recently. The head coach of the Canadian women's soccer team has stepped down, which means that this will now be the third coach that the team will have in 3 years. Of course, the former coach, John Herdman, is now coaching the men. So Kenneth Heiner Mahler, who was the coach, he went back to Denmark. And so they don't have a coach right now, less than a year out from the Olympics. So one name who's really, I'm hoping that this year they'll do a better search, but one name that's really come up obviously it's early days, but one name that's come up in the search for that coach would be Rianne Wilkinson. If you're not familiar with women's soccer, Rianne Wilkinson is a former player herself. She actually just retired, but she was on both the bronze medal team in 2012 and in 2016. So she knows a lot of the players as well. So she actually played with Christine Sinclair and Dada Matheson and those players. She's currently in charge of the junior program. So she knows a lot of the younger players on Team Canada as well. She's a very good developmental coach. John Herdman's mindset as a coach was a developmental coach. He actually started the developmental leagues. So I think she's still pretty young in her career, but I think she could be someone to step in, at least in an assistant role capacity, to take over and groom the team because she knows how to work with younger players. So she could be someone to take over as a transfer sort of in the market to end up coaching the Canadian national women's soccer team. So Rianne Wilkinson, I think, can do a good job. Maybe not yet, but at least maybe an assistant role capacity, not maybe as a full coach. And then kind of the final thing I have for soccer is it's not really a transfer. Well, there's a couple transfer things. The first one is that one of the big managers, or I think he's the chairman of Paris Saint-Germain in the Ligue 1 in France today, has come out and said that Edison Cavani and Thiago Silva is the captain, they will both be leaving PSG by the end of this season. Edison Cavani is a Uruguay national, and Thiago Silva is Brazilian, I believe. He said they both will be gone. They will not be back. And Edison Cavani has been rumored for a while to be leaving. But according to some sources that I found, some teams that could be interested in him are Newcastle United. Of course, now they have all that money because they have the new Arab money. Manchester United. And you're going to like this one. Atletico Madrid in Spain. And you're going to like this one, Charlie. Inter Miami in the MLS is a possibility for Edison Cavani, which would just be so not fair. But
which is fantastic because Miami is such a Latin city. He would fit so well as an Uruguayan. Also, Inter Miami is owned by David Beckham. David Beckham, of course, is going to be trying to bring stars to Miami. And he's already rumored, and he's already trying to get Cristiano Ronaldo, his former Manchester United buddy, to come play here when he retires, and it's going to be great.
And Edison, and I don't know if they ever played together, but David Beckham did play for PSG as well, and Edison Edison Cavani's on PSG right now. So those are kind of the 4 places that he could go. Those places all make sense, really, when you think about it. But the Newcastle one was interesting. It signals to me now that the new owners are mean business and that they're actually ready to spend money, which would be great for that club because that's a historic club. And then Thiago Silva, I'm not sure really where he would go. But the last kind of one that I have for soccer is today. It's another European soccer, and going back to the Italian league. So that league is back on again. Serie A. Dre Mertens, the Belgian international, is now the all-time leading goal scorer for Napoli with 122 goals for Napoli. And there was talks that he may move. I know that Chelsea wanted to run at him. I know Frank Lampard wanted to run at him as hopefully free transfer this summer. That apparently is out the window, and that he will sign a new contract extension in Napoli. And he's a very solid player for them. So that would be a great signing for Napoli to keep Dre Mertens, who is very good for Belgium and for Napoli as well. And that's really all I have for the marketplace for this week.
Fantastic, Rachel. Thank you so much. So everybody, it comes to our last and final segment. And this is a segment that we love to do. It is second installment of Ranting with Rachel. So how this works is I come up with a topic that Rachel will rant about, and she will rant about it and go after it passionately for 2 minutes. So I'm going to start the clock in 3, 2, 1. Your topic is the track record of the Pittsburgh Penguins doctors, starring from Sidney Crosby's concussion issues to mumps and injuries. And go.
Yes. So this is an issue that we talk about all the time, but it's not discussed in the media, the widespread media, really, outside of Pittsburgh, and I really don't know why. Because I don't know if it's just something in the Pittsburgh waters or if the doctors are just not doing a great job, but they do not have a great track record. And it is true that when these doctors are paid by the team and are employees of the team, they're going to do something in the team's best interest, which is not always in the best interest of the players, which is why I've been calling for neutral doctors. So yes, team doctors will not always do what's in the best interest for the player, especially when you have someone like Sidney Crosby. He's been the face of the NHL ever since he's been in the league. They're going to want to do what's best for the NHL, not necessarily what's best for Crosby. But this goes back to 2011 when, of course, Sidney Crosby was rocked by David Steckel with that blindside hit to the head in the Winter Classic outdoors. You can watch the video. It's not pleasant. He definitely looks concussed. That's at the end of the second period, but he comes back and plays the third period. But if you listen to him speaking after the game in the dressing room, he says, "I don't remember the hit. I don't know what happened," which is a sure tell sign that he's got a concussion. The doctors cleared him to play. Of course, there was no protocol in place at the time, but he really should not have been playing because he really was risking his health. And of course, 5 days later, he gets hit again from behind by Victor Hedman in the Tampa Bay Lightning, has another concussion, misses 10 months, comes back the next season, misses half of that season, missed a year and a half of his prime because of bad luck and also incompetency by the Penguins doctor. Another issue, of course, is the mumps, as Charlie just mentioned. So the mumps outbreak was a very weird phenomenon in 2014-2015 season. A lot of players had the mumps shot, and then they got a booster before they went to Sochi, the 2014 Sochi Olympics. But for some reason, there's a mumps outbreak that season. It started in Anaheim somehow. And of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins got it because, of course. And my favorite memory from that was when Crosby was was sitting down after practice, talking to the media, and his left cheek is clearly swollen, or his right cheek is clearly swollen, and swelling of the cheeks is a sure sign of the mumps. And the team says he does not have the mumps, and there is a woman, their PR woman at the time was pregnant, and she's in the room as Crosby. The mumps are highly contagious. She's pregnant in the same room doing a press conference with Crosby, who they said did not have the mumps. And the next day they came out and said, "Oh, we are wrong. He has the mumps." Not sure how you didn't see he had the mumps when his cheek was clearly swollen. But okay, so he ended up having the mumps, and a few other players on the Pittsburgh Penguins, of course, had the mumps. And they not only said he didn't have the mumps, but they let all reporters get in close proximity and let their own employee get in close proximity as well, who was pregnant at the time. Luckily, she ended up being fined, but that was very dangerous by the Penguins doctors for sure. Anyone could have told you that he had the mumps. So that was another example of just gross incompetence by the Pittsburgh Penguins doctors. And the team is just always ends up being injured. Of course, we talked last time I did Ranching with Rachel about Chris Letang's stroke, and the doctors actually handled that quite well, but they still, the fact that they weren't able to figure that out in preseason testing and figure out that he could have been at risk for that, I think is kind of odd because he's very in shape. So they should have known that he would have been at risk for that issue, that stroke issue, and that went undetected. So that was another thing that was kind of odd that they didn't notice. And it was only noticed because his mother-in-law happens to be a nurse, and she said, "You've had a stroke," and his team couldn't tell him that, but his mother-in-law told him he had a stroke. It's kind of a problem. So it's just a never-ending issue of bad track record by the Penguins doctors, not to mention someone who's not on the team anymore, Bo Bennett, kept having injury problems. Charlie's very smug about that because he told me Bo Bennett was not going to pan out. And
I did.
So it's just
nailed it.
A cascading myriad of injuries. I don't know how Phil Kessel avoided these issues, but it seems as though every time someone comes to the Penguins, they just get hit with injuries. And it's just, except for Phil Kessel, it's just, I don't know if it's the doctors or if it's a curse, but they're always injured on the Penguins. I definitely don't think that the fact that they're injured and is a coincidence that, this is happening against the Penguins and they've had these same doctors for Crosby's whole tenure. Maybe switch it up a bit, Mary.
All right. And with that, I know I said 2 minutes, but I had to let you keep going, and you actually did that in 5 minutes, which is pretty sweet.
Really?
5 minutes. And with that, folks, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 7 of Cross Continent Chats. Once again, my name is Charlie Wayman from Miami, Florida, and I am joined by my co-host and colleague and friend, Rachel Bishop from Toronto, Ontario. Have a great night.